At the Seola side dishes shop, a worker named Hunwoo was busy with his usual routine when he received a call from a customer. The customer asked if this was Seola side dishes, and after confirming, Hunwoo politely inquired about the issue. Upon hearing the complaint, he asked for the customer's address and apologized repeatedly, assuring them that the order would be redelivered shortly. He kept saying how sorry he was for the mistake. Nearby, a lady named Sooyeon overheard the conversation and curiously asked him about the situation. Hyunwoo simply replied that it was nothing serious. His full name was Lee Hyunwoo, and after finishing the call, he turned towards Sooyeon with a faint smile, remarking that she must have once again mixed up the soybean sprouts with the mung bean sprouts, as she usually did. From his perspective, after being discharged from military service, there had been a period of idle time before he could resume his studies. During that time, he decided to take up a part-time job at the side dish shop located near his home. Feeling embarrassed, Sooyeon apologized shyly, explaining that both ingredients were kept in similar containers, which made it hard for her to tell them apart. Hunwoo reassured her that it was fine, though he added that this mistake had happened quite a few times before. This woman, who often confused soybean sprouts with mung bean sprouts, was Jung Soo-yeon. Hyunwoo reminded her with a light tone that last time she had sent spinach instead of soybean sprouts, so at least this time she had sent something similar. Hearing that, Soo-yeon suddenly hugged him from behind, apologizing again and asking him not to be mad. Startled by her sudden action, he told her that she didn't need to do that and that he wasn't angry with her. She looked at him anxiously, asking if he really meant it and whether he was planning to quit. Hyunwoo looked confused and asked about her words. She apologized once more, promising not to make the same mistake again and pleading for forgiveness. He sighed and told her that he understood, asking her gently to let go of him. Inwardly, he thought to himself that normally he would have immediately quit working at a shop run by such a careless owner. But instead, he changed the topic, saying that someone had placed an order for stir-fried webfoot octopus, and since they were all out of stock, they needed to prepare more. He told Sooyeon that he would go out to make a delivery and asked her to pack the dishes while he was gone, calling her boss. He then asked if she had understood everything he said. Despite his occasional frustration, he couldn't bring himself to leave the job after hearing that she was struggling to manage the restaurant as a single mother. As she rummaged through the refrigerator, she picked up a piece of food and showed it to him, asking if that was what he was referring to. Watching her, Hyunwoo thought that she wasn't a bad person after all. They had been working together for about 4 months now. While continuing to search inside the refrigerator, Sooyeon murmured that she was sure the ingredient had been there a moment ago. Hyunwoo was giving Sooyeon instructions, telling her that the item she was looking for was on the right side of the third shelf. After checking, she called out that she had found it and turned to thank him sincerely. Hyunwoo smiled and told her that she really needed to start memorizing where all the side dishes were kept. Sooyeon immediately apologized, explaining that she was trying her best but still found it very difficult. He replied in an understanding tone, saying that he knew there were many kinds of side dishes to remember, and it wasn't a problem as long as he was around, since he could always tell her where things were. However, he reminded her that he would be returning to school next month, so she would need to manage everything on her own after that. She looked startled and asked if the new semester had already started. Hyunwoo nodded, saying that she needed to start getting used to handling things without his help. Hearing that, Sooyeon appeared both confused and saddened, murmuring that it was true. He had only planned to work there until he went back to school. Noticing her downcast expression, Hyunwoo tried to cheer her up, telling her not to worry so much. He assured her that she had improved a lot since he first started working there, and he believed she would be able to manage just fine without him. He added with a laugh that her cooking was incredible anyway, and that a side dish shop only needed delicious food to succeed. After all, that was the reason they had a 5-star rating. He went on to tell her that if she ever found herself struggling to handle everything, she shouldn't hesitate to call him. He would come and help out after his classes. Sooyeon smiled softly and told him to forget about that and focus on his studies instead. While the two were talking, someone was standing outside the restaurant door, quietly listening to their conversation. A moment later, the person entered and Sooyeon, thinking it was a customer, turned around to greet them, only to be taken aback when she saw that it was Solha. Startled, Sooyeon asked her the reason she had come. Solha handed her phone to Sooyeon, explaining that she had forgotten it at home. Sooyeon quickly admitted that she had been meaning to come and get it, but then shifted her tone and spoke with a bit of attitude. Solha ignored her mood and reminded her mother to take care of herself and to make sure to eat lunch properly. Then she handed over a small food package, saying that it was for her. Sooyeon looked embarrassed, saying that she didn't need to buy anything for her, but still thanked her, promising that she would eat it later. Yoon Seolha, at 23 years old, was the same age as Hunwoo and also the owner's daughter. Despite that, he had never had a proper conversation with her. As she stood there, Hunwoo politely greeted her, but Seolha didn't respond. Instead, she turned toward her mother and said that she had plans and needed to leave. Suyeon asked if she needed to buy any side dishes to take along, saying that Hyunwoo could help her if she did. But as usual, Seolha ignored Hunwoo completely. He stood there awkwardly, feeling embarrassed, as Seolha told her mother that it wasn't necessary since she still had plenty of leftovers from last time. Suyeon smiled and said that if that was the case, then it was fine, and reminded her daughter once again to take good care of herself. Hyunwoo, by now, had gotten used to being ignored like that, so it didn't bother him anymore. As Solha stepped out of the restaurant, she turned briefly to say good luck today, while Suyeon called after her, telling her to make sure she ate properly. Watching her go, Hunwoo couldn't help thinking that if someone who looked like him were working with his mother, he would probably feel uncomfortable too. Just then, their eyes met unexpectedly. Sola looked visibly irritated, but still, the way she stared at him, as if he were some kind of insect, felt excessive, especially since he hadn't done anything to deserve it. Sighing to himself, Hyunwoo muttered to Suyeon that it seemed he would never get the chance to talk to Solha before returning to school, since she clearly couldn't stand him. Suyeon chuckled and told him not to take it personally, suggesting that Solha was probably just shy, saying that kids these days often act like that. He now realized that everything he had assumed earlier was not entirely true. Considering how attractive the owner was, it was understandable that some men might actually feel intimidated or hesitant to approach her. Suyeon was standing in front of him, mentioning that it would be nice if the two of them could become friends. At that moment, he began to understand the reason behind Suyeon's earlier worry. She also told him that he didn't have to look at her like that and asked whether there was something on her face. He replied that there was nothing like that and explained that he had simply been thinking about something lately, that her beauty probably had a positive effect on their sales. Hearing that, Suyeon grew shy and responded that his comment was quite sudden. Jokingly, she added that if he wanted a raise, he could just say so directly. He insisted that he was serious, suggesting that perhaps they should include a photo of her with their deliveries. She appeared puzzled and said that she didn't quite understand his words. He explained further that they could start a campaign where customers who wrote reviews would receive a photo card of the shop owner, adding that such an idea might actually work well. Suyeon seemed frustrated by the suggestion and told him not to treat her that way, reminding him that she was his boss. He maintained that he was being serious and that if the shop was facing any financial troubles, she should at least try it out. However, Suyeon firmly refused, raising her voice as she did so. He thought to himself that once he returned to school, he would probably never see the owner or Solha again. A few days later, at Sola's side dish shop, Suyeon had arranged an impressive spread of delicious dishes on the table. Hyunwoo was surprised to see the display and asked her about it. She told him that it was nothing special and that she had prepared all of it because he would be returning to school soon. They needed to have a farewell party for him. Hyunwoo admitted that he had been wondering the reason she had called him in on his day off and said that she didn't need to go through all that trouble since he was only a part-timer. Soyeon asked if he didn't like it, adding that she knew they should have done this at a restaurant instead. He quickly clarified that it wasn't that, and thought to himself how grateful he felt toward her, though the real problem was that Solha was also there and hadn't spoken to him even once since his arrival, which made him feel extremely uncomfortable. The three of them sat around the table to eat. Suyeon urged him to start and told him to let her know if he needed anything else. He thanked her and began eating, commenting that the food looked and tasted great. She watched him eat and started laughing quietly. Curious, he asked about her suspicious giggle. Suyeon said that it was nothing and explained that it was just the first time she had seen him outside of work. Even though they were in the same place, she found it nice to see him in a different setting like this. He pointed out that she saw him every day anyway, but then added that he was genuinely glad to have the chance to see her lovely self one more time. Suyeon laughed and told him to at least make his flattery sound more believable. He insisted that he was serious. Meanwhile, Solha continued eating silently while listening to their conversation. After a while, Suyeon asked him whether he had a girlfriend. Surprised, he asked the reason she was asking such a question. She explained that since he was at the age when most people were interested in those things, she found it curious that he had never talked about it. Smiling, he replied that it wasn't as simple as wanting one. he couldn't just get a girlfriend because he wanted to. He added that girls didn't really seem to like him that way. Soyeon told him softly that it was nothing like that and added that, in her opinion, he would probably be very popular with others. He replied immediately that it was not true at all and explained that he had simply been too busy these days to think about things like that. Before he could finish his sentence, his eyes met Suyeon's balloons, and for a brief moment, he found himself lost in thought. There was something in her gaze that distracted him completely, and his mind wandered before he quickly pulled himself back to reality. He scolded himself internally, thinking that he shouldn't have allowed such thoughts to appear in his mind. Snapping out of it, he apologized and said that he had zoned out for a moment. Soyeon, slightly confused, asked about the reason he had suddenly stopped talking in the middle of his sentence. He hesitated for a second and then told her that it was nothing important, apologizing again before saying that he needed to use the restroom. After saying this, he stood up and walked away from the table. Seol-ha, who had been sitting quietly nearby, watched him go with a sharp and suspicious look in her eyes, as if she were trying to figure something out. When he entered the restroom, he went to relieve himself. His thoughts began to drift again, and he realized with a heavy feeling that he had almost said something he shouldn't have. He admitted to himself that, for a fleeting moment, the thought had crossed his mind. The idea that it would be nice if the owner, Suyeon, were his girlfriend. The realization startled him, and he tried to brush it off quickly, telling himself that such a thing was nothing more than a completely unrealistic fantasy. Just then, the sound of the door opening interrupted his thoughts. Someone suddenly entered the restroom, and when he turned around to see the person, he froze completely. To his shock, it was Yoon Sol-ha standing there. He looked at her in disbelief and immediately told her that this was the men's restroom, but Sol-ha didn't seem to care at all. With an unimpressed expression, she told him that he was being stupid and that it didn't matter, since they were the only ones in the shop anyway. He stared at her, still unable to understand the situation, when she suddenly asked him directly if he liked her mother. The question hit him like a slap, completely unexpected and impossible to process. Before he could even form a reply, she continued speaking in a sharp, accusing tone. She told him that he was not the first kind of man like this that she had encountered. She said she was referring to the type of men who let themselves get emotionally involved just because her mother happened to be kind to them. She added that she had known something like this would happen sooner or later, saying that he probably thought he was special simply because her mother treated him nicely. He tried to respond, his voice trembling slightly, saying that he didn't understand her words. He told her that she was taking things too far for no reason. He insisted that he had never thought of her mother in that way, and that all of her accusations were completely meaningless to him. But Solha only laughed, her tone sharp, mocking. She asked sarcastically if he was really claiming that he had never thought of her mother like that, even though she had seen him staring into her mother's balloons. Her words left him speechless and deeply confused. Before he could react, she smirked and said in a cold, dismissive tone that her mother really did have big balloons, a statement that left him frozen in silence. He stood there unable to say anything, completely frozen by the situation. Seola looked at him sharply and asked the reason he had suddenly become speechless. Then she turned away slightly, her tone full of irritation, saying that she had already told her mother not to hire any male part-timers. She accused him of only drooling over the opportunity to get close to her mother. Her words left him completely frustrated. In his mind, he thought that she was only stretching the situation unnecessarily. He knew he had never thought about the owner in that way and told himself that he didn't have to stand there and listen to her talk such nonsense about him. But then, in a sudden burst of emotion and impatience, he decided to speak bluntly. He admitted it openly, saying that yes, she was right. He liked her. It was a bold confession that even surprised him. He repeated firmly that he did indeed like the owner. For a moment, both of them just stared at each other in silence. Then Solha broke it by saying that she had been wondering if he even understood his own words. She told him to stop hanging around her mother and insisted that she already knew everything about the situation. But he tried to defend himself, saying that it wasn't how she was imagining it. The truth was the complete opposite of her thoughts. He continued speaking, saying that from his perspective, he said owner Soyeon was a beautiful and kind woman. Naturally, after working together for so long, he had developed feelings for her. But that was all. He had no intention of doing anything about it. He explained that he had simply happened to look into her eyes earlier and that it meant nothing more. He also mentioned that he knew very well how Suyeon often got hassled by men around her and that some even came to the shop pretending to be customers just to ask for her number. After seeing that kind of behavior from others, he said he could understand the reason Solha was acting so defensively toward him, but she had no idea about his real intentions and shouldn't have jumped to conclusions like that. He added that if he were truly that kind of man, he would have already confessed to Soo-yeon. His only goal had been to work hard at the shop. He even admitted that in the beginning, working with the owner had been stressful because she wasn't very skilled at her job, and that stress had nearly exhausted him. But over time, she had improved a lot, and he had seen firsthand how hard she worked, even with her weaknesses. He told Seolha that this was the reason he wanted to help her mother. Nothing more. He did like her, but he didn't want to cause her any trouble. He reminded her that he would be going back to school soon anyway, so even if Seolha couldn't stand seeing him around, she only had to endure it a little longer until he left the shop. Seolha stared at him, clearly confused. She said she couldn't understand his words, that he liked her mother but had no other intentions toward her. Then, in a doubtful tone, she said she didn't have to believe that kind of explanation. She told him coldly that, in the end, he was just another man trying to make excuses to justify his own behavior inside a bathroom. Her words made him even more frustrated. He thought to himself that, after all the effort he had gone through to explain everything honestly, she still refused to believe him. As he stood there silently, she noticed him looking in her direction and asked sharply through reason he was staring at her. She said that she thought he was done talking and questioned whether he was planning to stand there and watch her she used the restroom. Her accusations stunned him, but she didn't stop. She said mockingly that maybe he had moved on to her now because he realized he had no chance with her mother. That statement left him completely confused, and he finally said that he would just leave. He walked out of the restroom, his mind spinning in frustration, thinking that he had done nothing wrong. He thought to himself that Yoon Seolha might resemble her mother in looks, but her personality was completely the opposite. Still, it didn't matter now, he told himself. This would probably be the last conversation they would ever have anyway. As he stepped out of the restroom, he was startled to see So-yeon standing just outside the door. She looked both nervous and suspicious, asking him if he was already finished. She explained that he had been taking so long in the restroom that she had come to check, worried that something might have happened. She smiled faintly and said that she was glad he was okay. Then, almost as if to reassure him, she added that the bathroom walls were very thick, so she couldn't hear anything that had been said inside. Hearing that, he froze, and he immediately realized that he was in serious trouble now. Afterwards, all of them returned to the table and began eating again. Seola started a casual conversation with her mother, asking if she had watched a certain drama on Netflix. Soo-yeon replied that she hadn't been able to because she was too busy lately, then asked her daughter whether that drama was interesting. Meanwhile, Hinwoo sat quietly, eating his food in silence. In his mind, he felt as if he were sitting on a bed of thorns. He reminded himself that he had come here planning to stay calm and act clueless for now, but the situation had become far too awkward. He suspected that Soo-yeon must have heard everything that had happened earlier, even though she hadn't said a word to him since then. His imagination began to wander. He pictured Soo-yeon coming up to him and saying in disappointment that she finally understood the reason behind Solha's dislike toward him, that he had been thinking about her in that way when they were working together, and how upsetting that realization was for her. Snapping back to the present moment, he told himself that this kind of thing shouldn't have happened in the first place. He regretted it deeply, thinking that he should not have been such an idiot. He couldn't take back his words, but he wished he hadn't confessed so impulsively. He thought bitterly that he must be nothing but a terrible person for handling things this way. Solha, sitting nearby, seemed to notice his uneasy expression and hesitation. After a few moments, she turned to her mother and said that she was leaving now. Soo-yeon looked at her in surprise and asked if she was already heading out, adding that she remembered her mentioning an appointment earlier. Solha confirmed it, saying that she had planned to cancel the appointment and stay until the end, but now she didn't think there was any reason to remain longer. Soo-yeon asked if she wanted her to drive her there, but Solha shook her head and said there was no need. The place was close by. She told her mother to just eat instead, since she hadn't been able to eat properly while talking to her. Hanwoo watched the two of them quietly, thinking that earlier, Solha had looked at him as if he were some kind of criminal. But after everything that had happened, she seemed to have relaxed a little, though it was hard to tell her thinking. Soo-yeon nodded, asking her daughter if she was sure it was right to go alone, then told her to take care. Hyunwoo, meanwhile, was thinking that once Solha left, he would be left alone with the boss. The thought made him anxious, and before she could walk away, he suddenly stood up from his seat and said that he had something to say. Solha, who had just announced that she was leaving, turned back toward him and looked surprised. She asked the reason he was suddenly making such a fuss, saying that he had been eating just fine a moment ago and that his sudden behavior was unexpected. He quickly responded that it was just dangerous for a woman to go out alone when it was already dark and that he wanted to walk her to her destination. In truth, he was only trying to find a reason to get out of there first, telling himself that he would figure everything else out later. He added that the world had become dangerous these days and that it wasn't safe for her to go alone. Solha looked annoyed, clearly irritated by his words. She told him that she didn't understand everything he was thinking and warned him not to misunderstand the situation. She said that he shouldn't assume they were friends just because they had exchanged a few words. Acting like they were close, she said, was something that really upset her. Her words embarrassed him deeply. He stood there feeling both stunned and awkward, unable to respond. Solha then turned to her mother and said that she was really leaving now and told her goodbye. Soyeon nodded and told her to take care, while Solha added that if anything happened, her mother should call her right away. Hanwoo stood there helplessly, wanting to stop Solha from leaving but unable to find the right words. He thought to himself that maybe he was just overreacting. Perhaps the boss didn't even feel the way he feared she might. Or maybe she did, and that was what made her act so flustered. While Suyeon was sitting and eating her dinner, she suddenly began to cough. Hanwoo immediately handed her a glass of water, and after drinking it, she felt a bit more comfortable. He gently told her not to worry about him and to eat slowly, to which she nodded, thanking him softly. After a short while, as they continued eating, Hanwoo found himself lost in thought, completely confused by the situation that had unfolded earlier. Just then, Suyeon called his name, bringing him back to the present. Her tone was calm, but carried a trace of hesitation. She told him that, to be honest, she had overheard everything he and Solha were talking about in the bathroom, especially the part where it was mentioned that he liked her. Her words left him utterly stunned, unable to respond immediately. Then, she asked directly, almost cautiously, if he truly liked her that way, if he actually wanted her to be his girlfriend. He hesitated for a moment, nervous and unsure of anything to say, before finally admitting with some difficulty, yes, it was true. He was about to continue, perhaps to explain himself, when she quickly interrupted him. Apologizing, she said that it was a bit too hard for her to process everything all at once. She told him not to misunderstand her words. She wasn't saying that she hated him. In fact, she admitted that she was happy that someone like him could like an Ajuma like her. But at the same time, she confessed that she always thought he disliked her. She explained that perhaps it was just because both of them had been too busy lately and then gently asked for his thoughts. Hyunwoo sat there silently, thinking that the answer was probably obvious already. Then Suyeon continued, saying that he would soon be returning to his university, while she would still be busy managing the restaurant. Her voice softened as she added that her daughter was about the same age as him, and that perhaps he only felt this way because there weren't many women around him. She told him that once he went back to university, he probably wouldn't even think about an Ajuma like her anymore. He looked at her quietly, realizing how considerate she was trying to be. He thought to himself that she was just trying to reject him gently without hurting his feelings. After hesitating for a moment, he finally said that he understood, that they couldn't date each other. But he also added with a small, sad smile that even so, there probably wouldn't be anyone better than her at the university, and he felt a little sad about being rejected like that. Standing up from the table, he said it was getting late and that he should leave now. He asked if Sola would call her later, then added that he really enjoyed the food she had made. Noticing there was still plenty left, he offered to take the leftovers home and even said he'd take out the trash on his way out. As he was about to leave, Soyeon called his name again. When he turned back, she looked at him with a mix of apology and warmth. She told him she was sorry and that even though they had only known each other for a month, not a very long time, she could already feel certain things because they had spent so much time together. With a faint smile, she said softly that she could tell he was a really bad liar. He told her that he could not understand her words. She looked a bit hesitant, but then gathered her courage and said that it might sound awkward for her to admit this, but in some ways he seemed heartbroken to her. She explained that it looked as if he was having a hard time deep inside, but pretending that everything was fine on the outside. Hearing her words, he became quiet and started thinking that maybe he did look that way without realizing it. She continued talking, saying that if things were too difficult for him, then he didn't have to come to work starting tomorrow. She told him not to worry about his salary because she would make sure to pay him for all the remaining time he had worked there. She reminded him that there wasn't much time left before he would have to return to university anyway, so he should use this chance to rest properly before going back to school. He listened silently, And in his thoughts, he felt once again that this was the reason he liked her so much. She was always thoughtful, gentle, and considerate, and even now she was worrying about him rather than herself. Then she apologized softly, saying that all of this had happened because of her and that she felt responsible for the situation turning out this way. He thought to himself that even though he had tried his best to hide his feelings, it must have been very obvious after all. Then he slowly turned toward her and held her lightly by the shoulders. Looking at her with a serious expression, he called her boss and told her that he really didn't feel heartbroken like she was thinking. He said that he was not such a sensitive person and that she didn't need to worry about him like that. Then, in a slightly uncertain tone, he asked if she was saying all of this because she didn't want to see him anymore. She immediately shook her head and said that it was not like that. He gave a faint smile and said that, to be honest, he was a little sad, but that was a different matter. He added that it would be funny if he quit his part-time job just because he got rejected by his boss. He said with a half-joking tone that he would never quit if it meant he wouldn't get to see her pretty face again. She stood there quietly, seeming to think deeply about something. After a short silence, she looked back at him and said that she had changed her mind. Her sudden words left him completely confused, and he started thinking to himself that maybe she really didn't want to see him anymore, or perhaps he should have said that he would quit instead of insisting on staying. But then, breaking the silence again, she said clearly she had decided to accept his confession. At that moment, both of them froze and stared at each other, their faces turning red from embarrassment. The next day, he was standing outside on the street, still trying to process everything that had happened. He was thinking that he could not understand how things had turned out this way, and it all felt unreal to him. While he was lost in his thoughts, Suyun appeared at that moment, walking toward him and calling his name. She told him that he had arrived early today, and he turned to look at her. She was wearing a cute dress and looked especially pretty that day. For a moment, he just stood there, completely taken aback, realizing again how unexpected everything between them had become. After that, both of them went into the restaurant. While they sat together, she gently fed him with her spoon and fork, doing it playfully as an expression of affection and closeness. It wasn't something he was used to, but it felt special, something that showed how comfortable they had become with each other. After finishing their meal, the two of them decided to go to the theater to watch a movie. On their way there, they walked side by side. She quietly reached out and held his hand. He was a little shocked by the sudden gesture, his face turning slightly red, but he didn't pull away. They watched the movie together, still holding hands. When the movie ended, they left the theater, still smiling, and decided to go play some games together. They spent time laughing and competing playfully, enjoying every small moment, and they had forgotten everything else around them. Later, they went to have a nice dinner together, sharing food again and talking about random things that made them laugh. At the end of the day, as they were walking, she smiled and said that today had been a really fun day. He agreed immediately, saying that he knew felt like time had flown by really fast. She laughed and said that she wished time would move this quickly when they were sitting in the restaurant too. He laughed along, saying that he agreed with her completely. Then she looked at him with curiosity and started asking about his feelings. She told him that he had to be honest and tell her what it felt like to go on a date with her. She teased that it probably wasn't that great, and that maybe he had been thinking the whole time that he could have stayed at home reading comics instead. He started laughing, shaking his head, and told her that he didn't understand the reason she was saying that, because for him, this was actually the second happiest moment of his life. She smiled and laughed again, asking him about his first happiest moment. He looked at her and said that it was the day he first met her when he had just started his part-time job at Seolha Side Dishes. Hearing that, she couldn't help but blush and laugh softly. She told him that it was a relief to know he was satisfied and that he could go back to school without carrying any sad feelings with him. But then, in a quieter tone, she added that now that she had gone on a date with Hunwoo, she didn't want to give him to another woman. He laughed a little and said jokingly that maybe he should just close his restaurant and become Hyunwoo's boyfriend for real. As he said that, a thought crossed his mind. He remembered how she had told him earlier that she would accept his confession and be his girlfriend only for one day. Even now, he couldn't fully understand her words. Deep inside, he thought that he would love to go on a date with his boss, even if it was just for one day. Maybe she wanted him to create some good memories before he left, and that thought made him feel both happy and confused. Standing there, he asked her if this meant that he also had to take responsibility for Solha too, saying that it sounded a little difficult for him. She laughed lightly and replied that yes, he was right. It really would be too much. He then asked playfully if she even knew that kind of expression, and she said that she did. Very well. He smiled and said that she was a complete MZ, and she laughed again, telling him that he was teasing her once more. She mentioned that she had already eaten earlier and didn't know about their next action. Then she turned to him and asked if he had anything in mind. He looked at her and asked if she truly wanted to know about his thoughts. He said that there was something he wanted to do, but he wasn't completely sure about it. After a short pause, he added that he felt like he had already done everything he wanted to do, since this was his first time ever going on a date. She told him that he was right, but then said with a playful tone that there was still one thing they hadn't done yet. She explained that it would not make sense for them to call themselves lovers when they hadn't done that particular activity, adding that they had almost gotten into big trouble because of it. He looked at her with uncertainty, apologizing and saying that he didn't quite understand anything. He politely asked her to explain again, trying to catch her meaning. But instead of answering him directly, she looked around and said that there happened to be one nearby. Without waiting for his response, she suddenly started running forward, leaving him standing behind, surprised and unsure of where she was heading. He stood there for a few seconds, unable to figure out her words or where she was going. He followed her with his eyes, still confused. When he looked in the direction of her voice, he saw that she was standing near a motel, waving and telling him to come over. Seeing her there, his mind began to race, and all sorts of thoughts started running through his head. He wondered if she was calling him for something like a workout session. The thought made him nervous and embarrassed at the same time. He told himself that maybe she was right, that normal lovers might do such things. But then he quickly reminded himself that she was his boss, not his actual lover, and that maybe he was misunderstanding the situation completely. Still, his heart kept beating faster, and he couldn't stop overthinking about it. She looked at him again from where she stood, called him toward her, her voice carrying a light and teasing tone. He tried to respond but couldn't bring himself to say anything. His throat felt dry and his words got stuck halfway. Noticing his hesitation, she turned to him and asked softly if he didn't like it. Before he could even reply, she quickly added an apology, saying that she was sorry, getting excited all by herself. He immediately tried to clear up the misunderstanding, saying that it wasn't like that at all. He explained that he was just trying to mentally prepare himself, not that he didn't like it. She looked at him and smiled, saying gently that he didn't need to mentally prepare for something like this. Her calmness made him even more nervous, and he started thinking to himself that he had never imagined she could be this bold and straightforward. His mind began to fill with thoughts, and he started imagining how things might turn out. He thought that maybe if they went inside, they would have some sort of cardio training session together, and that she might tell him not to act so shy just because it was his first time. Everything felt so sudden and unexpected to him, and he tried to calm himself down. He told himself that in today's world, he shouldn't be so nervous like some inexperienced boy. And finally, he began walking toward her. When he reached closer, she looked at him again and asked if he didn't want to come inside. He hesitated for a moment, but then decided to follow her. She moved ahead. However, instead of going into the motel like he had assumed, she suddenly turned and went straight into the photo booth next to it. It was only at that moment that the truth hit him. He realized that she hadn't been referring to the motel at all, but to the store beside it. The realization made him feel a wave of embarrassment rush over him, and his face turned red as he stood there, realizing how completely he had misunderstood her intentions. He was feeling utterly embarrassed, his thoughts tangled in confusion and regret. The only thing running through his mind was that the photo booth really didn't have to be located right next to the motel. The placement itself seemed like a cruel coincidence, one that could easily be misunderstood. He was thinking that if he suddenly tried to go to the motel at that moment, she would definitely think of him as some kind of weird boy with strange intentions. He couldn't help but think that if this had been a real first date, he would have been dumped right then and there. Feeling a wave of panic, he told himself that he needed to clear up the misunderstanding immediately before it became something worse. As he was lost in his anxious thoughts, she suddenly started apologizing, her tone uncertain and slightly awkward. She said that she had been too obvious and admitted that kids these days tended to progress too fast in relationships. Then, as if trying to lighten the tension, she asked him whether they should go inside first. Hearing her words, he suddenly realized the depth of her misunderstanding. She had completely taken the situation the wrong way. Trying to fix things quickly, he spoke in a flustered manner, explaining that it was all just a misunderstanding. He told her that he had simply been lost in thought for a moment and hadn't even realized where he was walking. He insisted that he had no idea it was that kind of place, that it was purely coincidental. She looked at him, her eyes narrowed in suspicion, and asked whether he was really telling the truth. He nodded repeatedly, saying yes, the two places just happened to be next to each other, nothing more than that. Then, in an effort to break the tension, he let out a nervous laugh. Seeing his reaction, she relaxed a little and said that she had been overthinking things and that now everything made sense to her. He immediately told her that it was his fault to begin with, feeling guilty for letting the misunderstanding happen. Inwardly, he sighed in relief, thinking that at least the misunderstanding had finally been resolved. Trying to shift the atmosphere, he then asked her whether they should take some pictures together, mentioning that it was his first time too, and that he was actually looking forward to it. Still, he stood there with a stiff expression, unable to completely shake off the embarrassment. His face looked uneasy, and when he glanced at her, he noticed she wasn't saying anything. That silence made him anxious again, and he began to wonder if she might be getting angry. Then she softly called his name, which made him straighten up immediately. She looked at him with a calm yet serious expression and asked if he was really okay. He blinked, unable to understand her words at first. Before he could respond, she continued speaking, reminding him of her words she had said yesterday, that she wanted him to try everything he wanted to while dating her. She explained that she hoped he wouldn't hold back his true feelings just because he was worried about her and that he shouldn't restrain himself while they were together. She told him that she wanted him to be honest about everything he wished to do with her, assuring him that she wouldn't object to anything. Her tone was steady, almost too calm, as she added that it would be perfectly fine even if they went inside the motel. She said that since she was his girlfriend for the day, there was nothing strange about going there with one's girlfriend. He stood frozen in place, completely shocked by her words. His mind went blank as he tried to process the situation. The situation had taken such an unexpected turn that he couldn't figure out how to respond. He thought that going to a motel with his boss was something entirely impossible, something beyond his imagination. He had no idea how to handle the situation. Then she added, almost casually, that she had actually never been to a place like that before and had been curious about it for a long time. With a slight smile, she said that they should take this opportunity and at least have a look inside. He quickly gathered himself and spoke politely, saying that he had really enjoyed spending the day with her. He said that, to be honest, just working with her had already made him happy, but getting to go on a date like that was something he had never even dreamed of. He told her that it felt almost unreal, like a dream come true. However, he gently added that it might be better to call it a day and go home since he was feeling tired. She stood there quietly, her expression turning puzzled and confused by his sudden change in tone. Trying to sound reasonable, he continued, saying that if they had to go to work tomorrow, it would be better to rest early and go home now. She looked at him again and said that he was lying. He apologized, looking lost, and asked about her words. She reminded him that she had already told him before that he was terrible at lying. She said that, just like yesterday, he was pretending to be fine, even though he clearly wasn't. Then she said she would ask him again, and this time, he shouldn't hide anything. She told him to answer honestly and asked if he was sure about his decision, whether he really wouldn't regret going home without anything happening between them that night. Both of them eventually went inside the motel. The moment they entered the room, an awkward silence filled the air. Sitting down on the bed, she looked around with curiosity and said that the room was nicer than she had expected, adding that the bed felt really soft and comfortable. He laughed nervously, saying that yes, it really was. She still appeared a little confused by the situation, glancing around as if trying to process everything. After a short pause, she looked at him sitting stiffly in the chair nearby and asked teasingly if he had come there just to sit on that chair. She told him that he should come over and sit next to her instead, since the bed was much more comfortable. He quickly replied that he found it perfectly comfortable sitting where he was, trying to mask his nervousness. Both of them looked at each other in silence for a moment. Then, out of nowhere, she started laughing. He blinked in confusion and asked her the reason she was laughing. She immediately apologized, saying that it was just because he was acting so differently than usual and that seeing him behave this way seemed funny to her. He asked if he was really acting that differently, and she smiled, saying that he normally wasn't like this at work. He tried to defend himself, saying that he had never acted this way before. She chuckled and replied that it seemed he had another side to him as well, adding that normally he could be so intimidating that it was sometimes hard to talk to him. He asked if he was really that bad, explaining that he never meant to be scary. He told her that he was only human and that it was natural for him to feel nervous around her, especially when he was sitting in a place like that with the person he liked. She lay back slightly on the bed, smiling softly, and told him that he was actually very cute. Then, in a lighter tone, She asked him about the qualities he liked most about her. She continued, saying that she hadn't thought he was particularly interested in women since he rarely talked about anything other than work. She reminded him that in the entire month they had been working together, he had never contacted her for anything outside of professional matters, and then, out of nowhere, he had suddenly confessed that he liked her. He looked embarrassed but answered honestly, saying that he knew she might have been uncomfortable if he had made his feelings too obvious. He explained that it was just that she had always been very kind to him. She made sure he ate properly even when they were both busy with work, and he thought that might have been the reason he fell for her so deeply. She laughed softly and said that it was such a strange reason to fall for someone. He smiled faintly and told her that she was beautiful, calling her boss. She looked at him and told him that he was incredibly honest. He laughed again, the tension in his voice showing through. She then smiled and said that his honesty was actually part of his charm. He asked her if she really meant that, and she nodded, her expression warm. Then she told him that he didn't have to sit all the way over there and asked if he was really planning to stay on that chair talking to her like that. She suggested once more that he should come sit beside her instead. He hesitated for a moment, feeling unsure of next, finally said okay in a low voice. Slowly, he got up and moved closer, sitting down beside her on the bed. Both of them were sitting there now, looking visibly nervous, neither quite sure how to act. Then she gently placed her hand on top of his. His heart started racing, and he grew shy, awkwardly blurting out if she was thirsty and saying that he could go and get her some water. She smiled softly and said no. She was fine, thanking him for asking. He nodded quickly and said, unsure to say. She continued sitting there quietly, still holding his hand. After a moment, she looked at him and asked if it was his first time being in a place like that. He admitted that yes, it really was his first time. He explained that he had gone to an all-boys institute and then joined the military right after that, so he never had much experience with things like this. He added that part of the reason was also his financial situation. He had always been busy juggling part-time jobs and studying. Listening to him, she smiled gently and said that in that case, it must mean she was his first girlfriend. He looked at her for a moment and replied quietly that yes, he guessed she was. She looked at him with a thoughtful expression and asked if he was really okay with the thing that was about to happen. She said that the first time was an important thing for every man, especially when it came to such a personal experience, calling it a workout session. She then asked him if it was truly all right for him to have a middle-aged woman like her as his first partner in that kind of session. He hesitated for a moment before answering, admitting honestly that he wasn't entirely sure himself. He said that he had been struggling with the thought all the way there, wondering if it was really okay or not. He continued, saying that he knew Solha would probably beat him half to death if she ever found out about it, and that he was also worried about whether he would even be able to look at her, his boss, at work the next day. But then he added that worrying about it now wouldn't solve anything. The thing that mattered most, he said, how he felt in that moment. He told her that he really liked her, that being with her made him happy, and that the fact that she was his first girlfriend made him feel like the happiest man in the world. Hearing his words, she looked genuinely happy, her eyes softening as she told him that the way he spoke made him sound like a real man. He laughed quietly and asked if this was some kind of interview, trying to ease the tension between them. Smiling faintly, she said that if she had met him when she was 20 years old, she might have been able to be his real girlfriend. But then her expression changed slightly, and she quickly apologized, telling him to forget what she had just said and to pretend he hadn't heard it. He shook his head and told her that there was no need to pretend. He said that they could still make it real, that he could be her real boyfriend even now. He said that after returning to university, he could come visit her every weekend, that he would help her more at the shop, and that he would try even harder in everything he did. He told her that they should have a real relationship instead of just pretending. She smiled sadly and said that they couldn't do that. She reminded him that he was only blinded by his feelings for her and that he didn't truly understand. She said that girls these days were much younger, cuter, and full of energy, implying that he should be with someone closer to his age. As she spoke, he remembered how one of her juniors would invite him to a welcome party for the freshmen, and how another would ask him to come to her apartment for drinks. She went on to say that there would be countless young and pretty girls who would be eager to have him, and that one day he would surely leave an old, sick woman like her behind. Her voice trembled slightly as she said this, and she stopped talking halfway through, her words trailing off. He sat there quietly, thinking to himself that he could understand her reasoning. Realistically speaking, he knew it would be difficult for them to have a lasting relationship. But then he looked at her and asked softly if that meant they were only going to be in a relationship for today. She nodded and said yes, That was right, and that tomorrow she would be the one to dump him. He looked down for a moment and then said that it was still today right now, reminding her that there was still time left and that, at least for now, she was his girlfriend. Both of them gazed at each other in silence, and then he slowly leaned closer and kissed her. She smiled faintly and told him that at first he had kept pushing her away, but now he was finally becoming more assertive. Then, with a teasing tone, she said that now they were going to begin their sparring training session together. She laughed nervously and said that she hoped she didn't look strange or out of shape, mentioning that she had gained some weight lately. He looked at him and assured her that he didn't look weird at all. Smiling softly, she said that was a relief to hear. Then she reminded him to make sure he wore a helmet, keeping the tone playful but cautious. After that, both of them began their workout session together. She looked at him carefully and asked if he had really stopped doing the workout. Her voice carried a hint of tension as she wondered aloud if perhaps he had been discouraged or disgusted by the thought of doing such a thing with an older woman like her. He quickly shook his head and replied that it wasn't like that at all. He said that it was just a little embarrassing for him to say everything was on his mind right now. Then, with a hesitant tone, he asked if she was feeling okay. He said that looking back at their situation now, the two of them on a date that had somehow led them there, it was all because he had wanted it to happen. He admitted that she had simply gone along with it because he had liked her. He continued, saying that earlier he thought it might be better if they walked away, but now he realized he might regret it even more if they stopped halfway. He took a quiet breath and confessed that he liked her, his boss, very much. He said that he genuinely wanted to have the cardio session with her, but that he didn't want to go through with it if she didn't truly have the intention or desire to do so. He added that he would regret it far more if he ended up hurting her in any way. He told her that was the truth from his side. Then, lowering his head, he apologized for bringing her all that way when she had only been considerate toward him. He called himself an idiot for letting things get to that point. She looked at him sharply, her expression shifting to one of anger. She asked if he really didn't understand anything at all, demanding if she looked like the kind of woman who would agree to be with a man out of pity. He immediately tried to explain, saying that wasn't his words at all, but she cut him off and said firmly that she wasn't that kind of easy woman. Her tone softened slightly as she went on to say that she had accepted his confession only because it was him. She told him that she had come there solely because of him. She added that she had never once said that she didn't like him. In fact, she did. Looking at him seriously, she said that, of course, she wanted to do some wholesome wrestling training with him. Then her voice grew quieter, but more sincere. She told him that she wasn't forcing herself to be there just for his sake, not even for that day. She told him that she didn't think she even needed to say it out loud, because a woman would only come to a place like that if she truly liked the man she was with. After their sparring training partnership ended, the next day arrived quietly. At Seolha's side dish shop, Hyunwoo was already at work early in the morning, busy peeling a large pile of vegetables. As his hands moved automatically, his mind was completely occupied with the memories of what had happened the previous day. He couldn't stop thinking about it, replaying every moment in his head. He muttered to himself that he had gotten too excited on his own, that he might have gone too far. The thought that his boss would now see him as a strange or inappropriate man weighed heavily on his chest. He kept wondering if she must be thinking about him now, and each time the thought came back, he felt more embarrassed. He thought that he probably looked like some kind of weird person in her eyes. Letting out a quiet sigh, he thought to himself that he couldn't possibly face his boss that day. The shame and confusion made him want to avoid her altogether. But just as that thought passed through his mind, the door of the shop suddenly opened, and Suyeon stepped inside. He froze, his hand still holding a half-peeled potato, and looked up at her in surprise. His expression turned to confusion as he said that she was really there. She gave him a calm look and said that he was there early that morning. Trying to compose himself, he replied that he had come because he wanted to talk about the situation that had happened yesterday. Before he could say more, she spoke in her usual tone, saying that since he was busy peeling the potatoes, she would put on her apron and come help him soon. Her casual words caught him off guard, and he hesitated before saying softly that it was okay. As she tied her apron and started preparing, she mentioned that the seasoned vegetables must be really popular these days, since they were already running out of them. He agreed quietly, saying that they would have to make another batch soon. While he continued peeling, he occasionally glanced at her, confused by how calm and normal she seemed. Inwardly, he thought that she was acting the same as always. No awkwardness, no hint that the situation had happened between them. He started to wonder if maybe she wasn't bothered by yesterday at all. Maybe, he thought, this being a mature adult was like handling things without letting emotions get in the way. Deciding to follow her example, he told himself to stop overthinking. He tried to focus only on peeling the vegetables, but when he looked down, he noticed that he had cut off too much of the potato's skin. He sighed again, thinking that he was making unnecessary mistakes because his mind was still wandering. He reminded himself that he should focus on his work right now. Meanwhile, she stood across from him, looking slightly puzzled as she quietly continued her own tasks. Both are pretending to be absorbed in their work. That night, when he returned home, he lay down on his bed, his mind clouded with mixed emotions. He tried to convince himself that nothing significant had happened, that the events of yesterday might not have been as meaningful as he thought. He wondered whether the boss had seemed disturbed or bothered about everything that had occurred. Perhaps, he thought, she had already forgotten about it. Maybe yesterday was nothing more than a dream, something his imagination had exaggerated in the quiet of his mind. As he turned over, he admitted to himself that, dream or not, yesterday had been a wonderful day. He thought that he really shouldn't be acting this way. The boss had been considerate enough to go out with him, and yet here he was, allowing his heart to wander. He thought that it wasn't right to long for more than she had already offered. After all, she had probably agreed to go on that date simply out of kindness. He kept telling himself that a real relationship between the two of them was unrealistic, something that could never actually happen. As his thoughts continued to spiral, he realized that even if such a thing were to happen, it would only create problems. There was her daughter to consider, and he could easily imagine that getting involved any further might even lead to serious trouble. He sighed, admitting to himself that he couldn't control the fact that he still wanted to spend more time with her, especially those moments during their cardio training sessions, which he genuinely enjoyed. Still, he reminded himself that he needed to refocus on his studies. School was supposed to be his priority. He told himself to set everything else aside and concentrate on that goal. But as he stared at the time on his phone, a sudden realization struck him. He sat up abruptly, saying to himself that something wasn't right. Then it hit him. Yesterday was the last day for registration. Panic set in. He rushed to his computer and quickly opened the registration site, his heart pounding as he scrolled through the information. His face fell when he saw the date. He had completely forgotten about it. Everything had slipped his mind because he had been out with his boss yesterday. He groaned, realizing that the deadline had already passed. The realization hit him hard. He was completely screwed. The next day, while working at the shop, his mind was still heavy with worry. As he prepared side dishes and handled his daily tasks, his thoughts kept drifting back to his mistake. He told himself that he was now forced to take another semester off. The university staff had made it clear that nothing could be done since it was his own fault. He remembered the call he had made yesterday, how he had apologized repeatedly for missing the registration deadline and pleaded for a solution. But they had dismissed him coldly, saying that the rules were firm and that he had no one to blame but himself. He sighed quietly while working, thinking about the consequences. If he couldn't continue school for another semester, he would have to keep working to pay his bills. Then another concern entered his mind. Maybe his boss had already found a replacement for him, and if she hadn't, he thought that perhaps he could work for a few more months. But then reality struck again. Her daughter would definitely question him about it, reminding him that he had promised to quit this week. He imagined Soyeon asking him whether he wanted to stay at the shop that badly, to the point of going on a date with her. The thought made him cringe inside. He felt that it would make things awkward and uncomfortable for her, and he didn't want to put her in that position. He reflected on it quietly and thought that continuing there might only create unnecessary misunderstandings. Even though it would be inconvenient, he felt that he should start looking for another job somewhere else. Yet, deep down, another thought surfaced. It would be a lot of trouble for the boss to train a new part-timer from the beginning. He reasoned that it would actually be beneficial for both of them if he stayed on. But then he corrected himself again. No, he thought, that wasn't the real reason. The truth was that he simply wanted to keep working with her. It wasn't about convenience anymore, and it was about not wanting to let go. He sighed inwardly, realizing that he might be getting too attached, maybe even too clingy. As he stood there, lost in thought, Soyeon noticed his distant expression and walked over to him. She looked at him with concern and asked whether something was wrong. When she saw his startled reaction, she asked the reason he looked so surprised. He quickly tried to compose himself and said that it was nothing, but Soyeon didn't seem convinced. She glanced at the food he was packing and said that if nothing was wrong, there was no reason for him to pack so many stir-fried eggplants. She pointed out that the dish wasn't very popular, and 5 packs would have been more than enough. She studied him carefully and said that it was unusual for him to make such a mistake. Then she asked again if he was sure that nothing was bothering him. He looked at her silently, his mind in turmoil, and realized that he couldn't keep pretending anymore. Seeing the confusion on his face, she frowned slightly and, in a softer tone, asked whether he had perhaps forgotten something important. Her words lingered in the air as he was unsure how to respond. He let out a small laugh and said that when he had gone to register yesterday, it turned out the deadline had already passed. It had actually been the day before. Hearing that, Soyeon looked surprised and asked if he meant the day before yesterday. As she thought about it for a moment, her expression changed, and she said that if that was the case, then it meant he had missed his registration because he had been with her that day. He quickly responded that it wasn't like that, trying to deny the connection. But deep down, he thought to himself that she wasn't wrong either. After a brief pause, he continued speaking, telling her that she didn't have to worry about it. He said that once his replacement arrived, he would leave right away since he could always find another job somewhere else. So-yeon stood there, looking puzzled for a moment, and then told him that he could clearly see there was no replacement yet. She admitted that she still hadn't found anyone new to take his place. After saying that, she added that since things had already turned out this way, he should just continue working there for a few more months with her. She mentioned that there was no need for him to go through the trouble of looking for another job when it would be much easier to simply keep doing the one he already had. He nodded slightly and said that everything she was saying made sense. Inside, he felt a quiet sense of relief and began to think that maybe she didn't have any problem with him staying after all. Then, she told him that he should stay just a bit longer, saying it softly, almost as if she was unsure about her own words. He smiled and said that he would do that, even joking that he might as well drop out of school, and asked her to hire him as a full-timer. She responded by saying that was enough of that kind of talk and told him to get back to work. He agreed and returned to his work, feeling lighter inside. As he worked, he thought to himself that she truly didn't seem to have any issue with him staying, and that he had been worrying too much over nothing. While he went back to his tasks, Soyeon stood silently for a moment, and she thought that she had really gotten herself into trouble this time. She realized she had been carried away by the moment and had blurted out something she hadn't fully thought through. She told herself that even trying to tell him to leave now would make things even more awkward, and that was precisely the reason she hadn't gone looking for a replacement in the first place. As she continued thinking, she admitted to herself that, on top of everything, it was partially her fault that he had forgotten to register. She knew that he was good at his job and reliable, but she didn't know about anything else. Her mind kept wandering back to that night whenever she saw him, and it was making it difficult for her to focus on work. She thought that her only intention had been to go on a simple date, not to end up doing a workout session together. She remembered that she had even worn her best outfit for that day, expecting something completely different. Now, she found herself struggling to avoid him all day yesterday, and realizing she would have to keep this up for another 6 months made her feel trapped. Still, she consoled herself by thinking that maybe it wouldn't bother him at all. After all, boys his age were like that these days, carefree and unaware. As these thoughts swirled in her mind, he happened to catch her looking at him while working. Their eyes met briefly, and she quickly looked away, her thoughts scattering as she realized she had no idea about the next or how to handle the situation anymore. Later that night, after returning home, Soyeon stepped into the shower. The warm water ran over her skin as she tried to calm herself down. She closed her eyes and thought that she had felt like she was going to die earlier from how tense and anxious she had been. She admitted to herself that she was probably being overly sensitive about everything. Then she sighed quietly, thinking that, if anything, she was the one more concerned about the whole situation, not him. She told herself that this wasn't the right time to be worrying about such things. She needed to move on, to clear her mind and forget about it. She began to strengthen her fingers slowly. While doing so, she muttered under her breath that she must have gone completely crazy. The next day, Hunwoo went to the shop to start his usual work. As he stood there, he began to think to himself that, although he had come to work like on any other normal day, maybe he should not have come at all. Something felt strange to him, and it seemed as though his boss had been avoiding him ever since he arrived that morning. While he was lost in those thoughts, she happened to walk past him. He was holding a popsicle in his hand at that moment, and he called out to her, addressing her politely as boss, and asked if she wanted to have a bite of it. However, he ignored his words and simply said that he could have the whole thing himself. Hunwoo, still trying to be friendly, continued speaking and told her that she should at least try it once and see how it tasted. But once again, she turned down the offer, saying that it was fine just the way it was. He stood there, a bit taken aback by her reaction. In his thoughts, he kept telling himself that although she said she was fine, it clearly looked like she was uncomfortable being around him. He thought that perhaps it would be better if he stayed quiet for a while instead of talking unnecessarily. He could easily imagine how awkward it must be for her, having one of her employees showing signs of attraction toward her. The thought made him sigh quietly to himself, realizing that it must be uncomfortable for her. But deep down, he still felt uncertain about the situation. At that point, he admitted to himself that he didn't really understand anything anymore. After thinking for a moment, Hyunwoo started to wonder if directly asking her about it might be the quickest way to clear things up. Though he was unsure of how she would respond, he decided that it would be better than continuing to assume. Gathering his courage, he finally made up his mind to approach her. He walked toward her and called out, "Boss!" She turned around immediately and looked at him, asking if there was some kind of problem. He quickly replied that he couldn't tell whether the mackerel was properly cooked or not, and asked if she could come over and check it for him. She answered that if it looked cooked, then it was most likely cooked. Still unsure, she glanced at it and told him that it seemed cooked enough to her. But Hunwoo didn't feel satisfied with that and insisted that she should take a proper look, saying that they could get into serious trouble if they happened to sell fish that was still undercooked. She looked a little conflicted and confused, clearly not wanting to get too close, but finally agreed, saying, "All right," and started seeing the fish. She walked closer to him, leaned slightly toward the grill, and examined the mackerel carefully. After taking a look, she said that it looked good and would be perfect if he just let it cook for a little longer. And now, Hyunwoo nodded and asked again if she was really sure about that. She looked up at him and, with a slightly serious expression, said that it seemed like there was something else he wanted to ask her. For a moment, Hyunwoo hesitated, unsure how to bring the situation to his mind. After a short pause, he finally spoke and said that it seemed like she had been avoiding him recently. He looked embarrassed as he continued, explaining that maybe working together had become uncomfortable for her. She shook her head immediately and said that it wasn't uncomfortable at all. But Hunwoo still felt uneasy, and he told her that she didn't have to hide it, that she could be honest with him, and he would be fine. She repeated that it really wasn't like that, but as she said those words, her face turned slightly red and her tone became awkward, showing that she was now feeling embarrassed. He stopped for a second, his mind running with different thoughts, and then suddenly said that maybe the reason she seemed embarrassed was that the zipper of his pants was open. She looked at him quickly and said that it wasn't that at all. Then she asked him if he was still easily bothered by the situation that had happened a few days ago. When he looked at her, he suddenly realized that she was referring to that workout session incident from before. The moment he understood, his face turned bright red with embarrassment. He hurriedly tried to explain, saying that he wasn't bothered by it at all, that he had only been doing his best to act like everything was fine. He added that he thought she might dislike it if he made a big deal out of that situation. Hyunwoo continued speaking, saying that he had actually thought his boss didn't think much of that incident at all. He asked her gently if that had been bothering her all this time. She paused for a moment, lowered her head, and quietly admitted that it had. She added an apology, saying that she was the one who had brought it up first back then, but ever since she had been worrying about it like a fool. He quickly responded, telling her that it wasn't like that at all, and that she shouldn't feel bad about it. But she continued, saying that she had tried her best not to think about it or let it affect her. Yet every time she saw him, the memory of that moment came rushing back. Hunwoo stood there, feeling embarrassed for a moment. He told her that he was actually relieved to hear that, since he had thought she hated working together with him. She shook her head and said that it wasn't like that at all, insisting there was no reason for her to hate him. She explained that she was only a little hesitant around him lately, not because of dislike, but because she felt awkward. Hunwoo thought to himself that he needed to do something to break this heavy atmosphere between them. Then, he said that maybe he should have quit this job like they had originally planned. She immediately stopped him, saying firmly that he couldn't do that the store would fall apart if he left. She explained that she hadn't been able to hire anyone else and had already taken the job advertisement down. At that moment, Hyunwoo finally understood the reason she had been acting the way she did. She turned around and, in a flustered tone, said that he could do whatever he wanted, even if he didn't talk to her for the rest of the day. As she walked away, she muttered that, come to think of it, there had been no reason to go to a motel on the first date, and called him an idiot. Feeling defensive, Hyunwoo quickly replied that she had no right to come to that conclusion and that she was completely misunderstanding him. After a while, both of them went back to working together as usual, though the awkwardness still lingered between them. Hyunwoo kept thinking to himself that he never would have imagined that this was the real reason his boss had been feeling so uneasy. It surprised him that such a thing had been bothering her all along. A little later, he called out to her again. She was standing just behind him, working in the kitchen, and immediately turned toward him with a bothered expression. She asked if he had any problem and reminded him sharply that she had already told him not to talk to her. Hyunwoo hesitated, but then gathered all his courage. With a serious tone, he said that since things had already come to this point, they might as well start dating for real. As he said that, he gently placed his hands on her shoulders. She froze, clearly embarrassed by his sudden action, and he continued speaking, trying to explain himself. He said that if she thought about it, she had gone on a single date with him before because he was supposed to quit soon. But now that they were going to keep working together and she still felt awkward about the situation that had happened that day, it might actually be better if they dated for real. That way, there would be no reason for either of them to feel embarrassed anymore, since they would officially be in a relationship. But as he spoke, Hyunwoo realized inwardly that he was pushing the situation too far. Still, he thought that it would be better to be rejected once and for all rather than continue working together while enduring such an uncomfortable tension. Looking at her, he thought that maybe she was seriously considering his words. He told her softly that he had really enjoyed the time they spent together before, calling her boss once again. In his thoughts, he made up his mind that if she didn't accept his feelings, he would quit this job. He knew it was a strange and reckless thing to do, but just this once, he wanted to be honest and take this one chance. Turning toward her again, he faced her directly and confessed, saying that he liked her. She hesitated, her expression flustered, and said that he was getting too close to her. At that moment, she thought to herself that the feeling she was experiencing was just like it had been back then, the same confusion and warmth, and that she needed to push him away. She told herself silently that they shouldn't be doing this. She was thinking that if he continued getting closer to her like that, she would eventually have no choice but to react. Before he could take another step, she suddenly pushed him away with surprising strength, causing him to lose balance and fall onto the floor. She looked furious as she shouted at him, accusing him of trying to take advantage of the situation and acting in a strange, inappropriate way. She said she hadn't thought he was that kind of person, but now realized he was behaving like a real player. Hyunwoo lay on the floor, coughing lightly and trying to catch his breath. She looked up at him and raised her voice, saying that if he thought he could just stick his tongue out and she would give in so easily, then he had misunderstood her. She continued angrily, saying that she had already told him that everything that had happened before was only a one-time thing, but he wasn't listening. She scolded him for pulling something like that inside the shop, reminding him that if a customer happened to walk in, it would cause serious trouble for both of them. Trying to recover from the embarrassment, Hyunwoo gave a half smile and uttered that it was a shame because he had been pretty sure he had almost won her over. She immediately asked his words and demanded to know if he thought she was some kind of joke to him. He quickly tried to ease the tension, saying that he was only kidding and didn't mean anything by it. He added that he was actually glad because for the first time in days, she seemed like her usual self again. He told her that, just like he had said before, he was simply happy to be able to keep working with her. He reassured her that he would be fine, even if she didn't accept his feelings, and told her not to worry about it so much. She stood there quietly listening to his words. He went on to tell her that there was no need for her to pretend or lie about how she felt, and that he truly meant his words. Before he could finish his sentence, she suddenly told him sharply to put his weapon away before saying anything else. Her words caught him completely off guard, and he froze in embarrassment. He thought to himself that he hadn't even kissed her. Flustered, he quickly adjusted his position, trying to hide his weapon, and stammered that it wasn't everything she thought at all. She looked at him seriously and asked if things had reached this level because of her presence. Later that night, after the shop had closed, both of them went to the restroom and began doing their usual cardio training together. The quiet rhythm of their exercise was suddenly interrupted by a loud, banging sound coming from the front door of the shop. Both of them stopped immediately, startled by the noise. She looked toward the entrance with a tense expression and said that she didn't understand who could be there, since she was sure she had already put up the closed sign. She wondered aloud if it might be a customer who had arrived by mistake. As they approached the glass door and looked through it carefully, Both of them froze in surprise. The person standing outside was none other than Seolha. Seolha stepped inside the shop and immediately began questioning both of them. She looked at the two with suspicion and asked if they were really saying that they had locked the door only for a short while because they had been hit with a sudden wave of orders. Hunwoo quickly nodded and explained that yes, they had done it because if a customer had walked in during that rush, they could have easily made mistakes with the orders. Sooyeon let out a small laugh and tried to sound casual, saying that Solha had totally surprised her. She had honestly thought that someone was trying to break down the door. She added, jokingly, that she still didn't understand where her daughter got so much energy from. Hyunwoo joined in with a laugh, saying that it had to be Solha herself since she was always so energetic whenever they were working together. Suyeon smiled faintly and agreed with him, saying that he was right about that. Sola, however, stood there quietly for a moment, and she turned toward Hunwoo and said that while she was sure her mother knew perfectly well how to manage the shop, there was still something she wanted to talk to him about. Her tone grew firmer as she said that she had noticed how close he seemed to be standing to her mother, and that, from her point of view, it looked quite suspicious. She told him that from the perspective she had seen, he didn't really need to stand so close to her mother just to discuss work matters. It almost looked, she said, as if he were taking advantage of the lack of customers to spend unnecessary time near her. Before she could continue, Suyeon quickly stepped in, trying to stop her daughter. She told Solha that it wasn't like that at all and that she was misunderstanding the situation. But Solha continued, saying that they had locked the door even though there had been no real reason to do so. Hunwoo tried to defend himself, insisting that it wasn't as she thought. He added that her mother's face was red because she probably had a fever, since a flu had been spreading around lately. Suyeon immediately waved her hands and said that it wasn't true, that she was totally fine. Still unconvinced, Solha placed her hand gently on her mother's forehead to check. She said that it felt warm, but not quite like a fever, though her mother did seem a little tired. Soyeon sighed and told her again that she was fine, explaining that she was simply exhausted from working all day. As Solha leaned closer, she suddenly paused and looked thoughtful. She told her mother to wait for a moment and said that she smelled something odd, something old and unfamiliar. The scent, she said, was definitely coming from her mother. Before Suyeon could answer, Hyunwoo quickly jumped into the conversation, saying that the smell she was talking about was actually from one of the ingredients they had been using. He explained that it just happened to have that kind of strong, aged aroma. Suyeon nodded immediately and backed him up, laughing softly as she said that he was right. She had been preparing that very ingredient just a short while ago. Still doubtful, Seolha asked if that was really true and said that she had never smelled anything like it before. She asked if the ingredient was something new that they had added to the menu. Hyunwoo replied that yes, they were about to introduce a new item called chestnut flower tea. After hearing that, Sola seemed to relax a little and said that she finally understood, so that was the source of the smell coming from her mother. Hyunwoo quickly agreed, trying to sound calm, though inside he was thinking nervously that if they got caught lying, it would be the end for him. Seolha looked at both of them again and said that she would leave the matter up to her mother, then turned to ask if Suyeon was really feeling okay now. Hunwoo watched quietly, feeling relieved as he realized that Seolha seemed to have believed their explanation at last. As Seolha looked around the shop, she noticed a piece of tissue paper in her mother's hand and immediately asked about it. Suyeon seemed startled for a moment, her expression tightening in surprise, but she quickly composed herself and explained that she had just used it to wipe up some spilt sauce. Trying to act natural, she handed the tissue to Hunwoo, told him to throw it away. Hunwoo nodded quickly, took the tissue from her hand, and said that he would take care of it. Solha watched the exchange closely, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to make sense of the situation. The whole situation looked odd to her, but she couldn't quite understand the scenario in front of her eyes. Sensing her daughter's suspicion, Suyeon decided to change the subject. She asked Solha the reason she had come by and whether she needed something from the shop. Sola shook her head and said that she had simply been on her way to the convenience store when she noticed that the shop's door was locked, which made her curious enough to stop by and check. A moment later, Hyunwoo returned after throwing away the tissue, saying that he was back. Solha turned to him with an unimpressed expression and continued the conversation, saying that she had also come to see the guy who had so shamelessly crawled back here, even though he was supposed to quit his job soon. Hyunwoo looked embarrassed and scratched his head awkwardly, saying that there was actually a good explanation for that. Sola folded her arms and replied that she was sure there was, then added sarcastically that he had probably delayed going back to school because he realized that staying here a little longer might give him a chance to attract her mother's attention. Before Hunwoo could respond, Suyeon quickly stepped in, stopping her daughter's words. She told Solha not to talk to someone like that, especially someone who was working so hard in the shop. She explained that it had been her idea to ask Hunwoo to keep working there, reminding her daughter how difficult it was to find reliable part-time workers in their area. But Solha didn't seem convinced. She frowned slightly and said that this was exactly part of his plan, that he was probably hiding his true intentions behind that polite attitude. Soyeon let out an exasperated sigh and gently pushed her daughter toward the door, telling her firmly that she wouldn't be deceived by anyone's intentions and that she could take care of things herself. She told Solha to go on now, since they were about to get very busy with the usual customers and routines. Reluctantly, Solha agreed and said that her mother should call her right away if anything unusual happened. Suyeon nodded and said, "All right," then asked if her daughter needed anything from the shop before leaving. Sola smiled faintly and said she didn't need anything, but reminded her mother to make sure she ate properly. Suyeon nodded once more, saying that she would, and then Sola finally left the shop. When the door closed, Hyunwoo stood there for a moment, letting out a long breath of relief. He thought to himself that he had nearly died from the tension. The situation had completely taken him by surprise, and he still couldn't believe she had shown up so suddenly. Suyeon agreed, saying that it had been a very close call for both of them. Hyunwoo nodded and said that even so, he felt relieved now since it seemed like they wouldn't get caught. Suyeon smiled weakly and replied that yes, for now, they were safe, but he had no idea the situation could happen if Solha ever found out the truth. Hunwoo sighed again and asked about her words, meaning that the truth was the fact that they had both been in the restroom together. She was asking for his opinion about the immediate execution, wanting to know his thoughts, and then she asked if he truly wanted to come back to work again. He replied earnestly that yes, he did, and so the two of them began working together once more. Later that night, after finishing all their work, she told him that he had done a very good job that day. He smiled and replied that she had also done very well. As they stood there after closing, he thought to himself that they had been so busy dealing with customers right after everything that had happened that there had been no real chance for them to talk about it. In a way, he considered that a good thing. Perhaps it kept things from becoming awkward between them. She then said that it was time to leave and asked if he had his phone with him. He replied that he did, while thinking to himself that the boss didn't seem particularly bothered by the situation anymore. She then told him to make sure he got plenty of rest before coming in to work again, saying that today was the only day she would overlook things as they were. He looked at her, confused, saying that he didn't quite understand her words and thought that she was completely misunderstanding the situation. Suyeon, however, added thoughtfully that, come to think of it, maybe Solha had actually made a valid point. Her words left him completely shocked. After that, he went back home and sat down in front of his computer. On a public confession page, he began typing, asking people for their opinions about a part-timer dating his boss. The responses came quickly. Many people accused him, saying that people like him made it harder for single mothers to manage their work peacefully. He stared at the screen, thinking that perhaps such reactions were inevitable, but still found the comments unreasonably harsh. He sighed, realizing that maybe he shouldn't have posted anything like that in the first place, yet he still didn't know how to think about what his boss truly felt about the situation. Meanwhile, on the other side, Suyeon was sitting in her home, also searching for something similar on her phone. She hesitated for a moment, thinking that she probably shouldn't be looking up things like that, but admitted to herself that she just didn't know anything else to do either. Both of them, in their separate homes, found themselves thinking deeply about the strange situation between them. The next day at the shop, Hunwoo was yawning while doing his work. He muttered to himself that it seemed like nothing special was going to happen today, and noted that the boss was running late. But then, suddenly, someone entered the shop, and he immediately assumed that it must be Suyeon. He turned toward the door, ready to greet her with his usual morning welcome, but froze in surprise when he saw that it wasn't Suyeon. It was Solha who had just stepped inside. His eyes widened as he stared at her, completely taken aback by her unexpected appearance. He thought that perhaps she had come because of everything that had happened yesterday. He began to worry, thinking that maybe they had only managed to trick her temporarily, that she had only pretended to believe them yesterday, and now she had come back to expose or even confront him before the boss arrived. The thought terrified him, and he stood still, thinking that he hadn't done anything wrong. Yet he couldn't run away now either. Silha looked directly at him, her expression unreadable, and asked whether he had anything he wanted to say to her. He stammered slightly and said that no, he didn't have anything to say. She nodded curtly and told him to get out of her way. He quickly moved aside, saying as she walked past him. He remained in a state of confusion, muttering to himself that the boss still hadn't come in for work yet. Solha then put on an apron and he, still startled, asked her about the tasks they were supposed to do now. Her calm tone surprised him even more as she replied, asking whether he wasn't already aware of everything that needed to be done. She explained that her mother was attending an acquaintance's funeral, so she had come to fill in for her, a fact that, in her words, should have been obvious. Hanwoo was completely shocked again, realizing that he would have to work alongside her that day. She then looked at her apron and asked if there was a larger one available, since the one she was wearing felt too small for her. He remained quiet, still lost in confusion, thinking about how awkward this situation was becoming. Breaking the silence, Solha looked at him and asked if he was really not going to answer her question. Hyunwoo went to the restroom and took out his phone to call Soo-yeon. When she answered, he told her that she could have at least sent him a text message, saying that he had been completely surprised when she didn't show up. On the other side of the call, So-yeon apologized in a slightly rushed tone, explaining that she had only learned about the situation earlier that morning. She said she had been in a great hurry and was just about to message him before leaving. Hyunwoo replied that he understood her situation, but his concern was something else entirely. He told her that the problem was that Solha had shown up at the shop for work. So-yeon confirmed that it was true, explaining that Solha would be filling in for her until she returned. She mentioned that thankfully, it wouldn't be too busy that day, so things should go smoothly. Hyunwoo responded that this was not the kind of answer she should be giving him, as he said that he was perfectly capable of working alone for a day. He asked if she truly wanted him to work alongside Solha. So-yeon tried to ease the situation, telling him that 2 pairs of hands were still better than 1. She added that the 2 of them might even become friends after spending some time together, saying lightly that even on a battlefield, friendships could bloom. Hyunwoo said in frustration that there was no way that would happen, but Soo-yeon simply told him not to act that way and reminded him that it was only for 1 day. She said she was counting on him and promised that she would give him a reward when she returned. Hyunwoo told her not to talk about rewarding him, saying that he was not a child. After a short pause, he added that she shouldn't worry about the shop and should instead focus on taking care of the things on her end. So-yeon agreed and said that she would see him later. After saying that, Hyunwoo ended the call. Sitting there in the restroom for a while, he sighed deeply and thought to himself that he was going to completely lose his mind. A moment later, he stepped out of the restroom and came face to face with Solha. She asked him the reason he had taken so long inside and teasingly accused him of leaving all the work to her. Hyunwoo apologized immediately, explaining that he had just gone to the restroom for a short while. Solha replied that he had taken so long that she had gone ahead and mixed the bracken herself. Hyunwoo told her that he was about to do that, but she answered confidently that she already knew how to handle it. When he asked if she really understood how to mix the side dishes properly, she looked at him with pride and told him that she was the Solha of the Sola side dishes shop. Hyunwoo thought that maybe working with her might not be as difficult as he had imagined. Then again, he remembered that she had worked there even before he had joined. Deciding to check her work, he tasted the food she had prepared. At first, he thought he had worried for nothing, but after taking another bite, he frowned slightly and told her that the seasoning was far too bland. He added that it wasn't just bland. In fact, it didn't seem like there was any seasoning at all. She stood there looking quite confused for a moment before explaining in a serious tone that consuming too much sodium was bad for one's health. Hearing that, Hyunwoo felt a wave of nervousness and quickly tried to respond. He said that he understood and that he would take care of the other side dishes himself. Then, trying to redirect the work, he asked her if she knew how to peel boiled eggs. She answered confidently that she did, adding that it was something everyone knew how to do. Hyunwoo told her that in that case, she should go ahead and handle that task, mentioning that he had already placed the eggs on the counter in the kitchen. She asked if she only needed to peel them and told him not to worry, saying that he could leave the job to her. Hyunwoo agreed and said, okay. As he watched her leave to do the task, he thought to himself that preparing side dishes was definitely one of the hardest parts of the work. He figured that peeling boiled eggs was such a simple task that she would surely manage it easily. He hadn't expected her to actually do it right away, since he assumed she would argue or complain, but she didn't, and that surprised him. He even started thinking that just like the boss had said, they might actually become friends after all. Just then, he heard an odd sound coming from behind him. He frowned slightly, thinking that someone didn't need to make such strange noises just to peel boiled eggs. When he quickly turned around, he was completely shocked by the scene. Solha was working in a rush, clumsily peeling the eggs with a serious expression. She looked up at him and said that the eggs were in bad condition and were extremely hard to peel. Hanwoo sighed and told her that she didn't have to eat them, then said that he would handle the rest himself. He instructed her instead to take care of something else. He mentioned that he had placed the dongchimi on the counter and told her to put it into individual containers. She smiled and said that it was a piece of cake. Hanwoo stood there for a moment watching her and thought that maybe she could manage that task. Then again, he told himself that there really wasn't a matter of being able or unable to do it. After all, it was just about separating and labeling them into containers. He thought with a hint of frustration that he could probably get a group of elementary school students to handle something that simple. Still, when he looked over again, he noticed that she somehow managed to leave behind more broken eggs than whole ones. Hunwoo thought to himself that he would now have to boil more eggs and sighed in frustration, realizing that the work seemed to be increasing rather than decreasing. After a while, Sola announced that she was done. Hunwoo turned around, ready to say good job, but the moment his eyes landed on the containers, he froze. The sight made him panic slightly. The containers were a complete mess, with food spilling out from the edges and the contents unevenly packed. He looked at her and said in a flustered tone that it seemed like she had spilt more food than she'd actually packed. He thought to himself that he probably wouldn't be able to come up with another excuse for this situation. Trying to make sense of it, he muttered that there were a few spills, but then asked the reason the container on the left was filled with radish and cabbage, while the one on the right had none at all. She stood there, looking completely confused, clearly unsure how to respond to his question. After a short pause, she awkwardly said that maybe some customers preferred their orders without radish and cabbage. Hyunwoo looked at her, realizing that she was just making up another excuse, and thought to himself that she should stop trying to justify every mistake. He told her to simply redistribute the food properly. In his mind, he sighed, thinking that she was turning out to be completely useless at this point. He muttered under his breath that he couldn't understand how they had managed to run the shop before he joined. He decided that it was probably best to let her handle only the simplest, most menial tasks while he took care of the important work himself. Just then, the sound of the shop's bell rang, signaling a delivery order. Hunwoo quickly called out to her, saying that he would clean up the mess there, and told her to go check the order and handle the packing. Solha replied with a simple fine and walked away toward the front. As she left, Hunwoo thought to himself that maybe she would finally start following his instructions. Feeling a bit relieved, he began cleaning up, thinking that he could finally relax now. He told himself that she had actually listened to him for once, which he hadn't expected. He thought she would just ignore his words and do whatever she wanted as usual. He was still thinking that the boss would probably be back soon, and he could finally take a break. But before he could finish that thought, he turned around and froze when he saw Solha standing behind him again. Startled, he asked her the reason she was still in the kitchen. She answered calmly that there had been an order for fried tofu, but they had run out, so she had decided to make some herself. She added that he needed to stay on top of things like this and restock properly in the future. Hearing her words, Hyunwoo thought to himself that she was right about that, but at the same time, something about that she said suddenly alarmed him. The mention of fried tofu made him realize everything she was about to do. He turned just in time to see her placing tofu directly into the hot oil. His eyes widened in panic, and he shouted for her to stop. Before he could reach her, there was a loud hiss and burst as hot oil splattered everywhere. Acting on instinct, he ran toward her, pulling her away from the stove and bringing her safely to the other side of the kitchen. His heart was pounding as he realized the situation. Thinking quickly, he rushed back to the stove and turned off the burner. Then he looked at her and yelled, asking if she had gone completely crazy, and told her that she didn't have to try to do everything on her own. But as he spoke, he suddenly realized that he was gripping her arm too tightly. Seeing that, he immediately let go and began to apologize, saying that he hadn't meant to hold her that way. He told her that he was just worried she might get hurt since open flames and oil were a dangerous combination. He added that he wasn't angry at her. He simply wanted her to be careful. Trying to lighten the situation, he said that even famous chefs like Gordon Ramsay got irritable in the kitchen and that his reaction was purely out of concern. He explained that he had only grabbed her to protect her from the splattering oil. Hearing that, Solha lowered her head, looking extremely embarrassed. She apologized softly and, without saying anything else, quickly turned and left the shop. Hyunwoo stood there, trying to call out to stop her, but she didn't turn back. Watching her leave, he let out a long breath and thought to himself in frustration that he was completely screwed. He was sitting there, cursing himself over everything that had just happened, his mind filled with regret and frustration. He kept thinking that he had tried far too hard not to get on her nerves, and yet he had somehow managed to make things worse. He thought bitterly that he really needed to work on his self-control and that he couldn't believe she had actually run out of the shop because of him. Just then, the door of the shop suddenly opened, the sound pulling him out of his thoughts. For a moment, his heart jumped, and he immediately assumed it was Seolha coming back. However, when he looked up, he saw that it was not her, but Sooyeon who had entered the shop. She walked in with her usual calm and cheerful expression and asked him in a light tone if he had been doing well while she was gone. He was a little surprised to see her, not expecting her return so soon, and could only stare at her for a moment before trying to respond. Noticing the tired and slightly troubled look on his face, she tilted her head and asked the reason he was sitting like that, pointing out that he looked exhausted. Embarrassed, he quickly tried to brush it off and said that he was just stretching for a bit. Sooyeon laughed at his response and said there was no way that was true. Her laughter filled the shop, easing the tense atmosphere slightly. He smiled awkwardly and, trying to shift the conversation away from himself, began asking about her instead. He asked if things had gone well over there, hoping to sound casual. She nodded and replied that yes, everything had gone smoothly, and it was all thanks to him. After that, her expression changed slightly as she looked around the shop and asked where Seolha was, wondering if she might be in the restroom. At that question, he felt a sudden wave of panic and quickly said that she had just stepped outside for a second. Sooyeon immediately grew concerned upon hearing that and asked if something had happened between the two of them while she was gone. Her tone carried both worry and curiosity. He shook his head and said that nothing had happened at all. But Sooyeon still looked doubtful and pointed out that his reaction seemed strange. She said she had a feeling that something really must have happened, and then she asked directly if Seolha had been mean to him. He became flustered and hurried to deny it again, insisting that it was nothing like that and that everything was fine. Before he could say anything more, the shop door opened again. Seolha walked in. She looked extremely tired, her steps slow and heavy, and her face showed surprise when she saw her mother standing there. The moment she recognized Sooyeon, she asked in surprise when she had come back. Sooyeon smiled gently at her daughter, but spoke in a slightly scolding tone, asking if she had been giving him a hard time again. She reminded her that she didn't have to behave like that, and that there was no reason to treat him harshly. Seolha stood frozen for a moment, looking completely surprised and unable to understand her mother's words. She blinked a few times, trying to process the situation. He, noticing her confusion, immediately tried to explain everything to Sooyeon. He said that Seolha hadn't given him a hard time at all. In fact, he had been a big help that day. He told her that she had really shown the reason she was known as Seolha Side Dishes. Sooyeon looked at him, still unsure whether to believe his words, and asked if he was telling the truth. He smiled and said yes, insisting that everything he had said was true. At that moment, Seolha suddenly called his name in a firm tone. When he turned around to look at her, she threw a small package toward him without warning, leaving him startled. He was still standing there when Seolha suddenly said now that her mother was back, she would be leaving. She apologized to her mother, explaining that she already had plans and needed to go right away. After saying that, she quickly walked out of the shop again, leaving both of them behind. Sooyeon turned toward him with a questioning look and asked about the situation. He seemed a bit uncertain himself, but then noticed the package Seolha had thrown earlier. When he opened it, he saw that it was filled with first aid supplies, bandages, ointments, and a few other items. Seeing this, Sooyeon's expression softened, and she remarked with a small smile that the two of them seemed to be closer than she had thought. After that, he began explaining everything that had happened earlier. The small accident in the kitchen, how the oil had splattered, and the way Seolha had helped him afterward. As he spoke, Sooyeon gently took one of the bandages and began wrapping it around his arm with care. While doing so, she said in a concerned tone that he should have told her right from the beginning that something like this had happened. He quickly shook his head and said that it was nothing serious, just a minor mistake, and that there was no need to worry. But Sooyeon frowned and said she couldn't understand him. If it was truly nothing, then he should not have looked like that. She pointed out that oil must have splattered all over him, and it was clearly painful. He smiled faintly and told her not to worry about it, saying that they were only minor burns. Sooyeon, however, looked embarrassed and lowered her eyes, apologizing softly, saying it was her fault. He immediately told her that she didn't need to apologize like that, but she continued, saying that if she hadn't left, it wouldn't have happened in the first place. He tried to reassure her, saying that it had nothing to do with her leaving, and if anything, he was actually grateful to Seolha. He added that she had come to help even after everything, and that he had been relieved to learn he hadn't run out because she was angry. He admitted that he had never imagined she had gone out to buy something like that for him, and that maybe, at last, Sola had started to acknowledge him as an actual employee of the shop. Suyeon smiled gently and said that if that was true, then she was happy to hear it. She told him she was glad he had started working there and that she was always grateful and also a little sorry to him for everything. Then she mentioned that it seemed like Sola had finally begun to open up to him a little. She even pointed out that Sola had brought him some ice cream, saying it was a big step forward for her. While she spoke, he glanced at the cake and thought to himself that things had become surprisingly wholesome now. It hadn't always been like this, especially in the beginning. He reflected on how much had changed after everything that had happened, and as he looked at Suyeon standing there in her formal clothes, he thought that she looked even more graceful than usual. He told himself silently that he needed to get it together. Then Suyeon smiled playfully and asked if he wanted some kind of reward. Perhaps a kiss. He knew that she often made such jokes, and he thought to himself that she was trying her best to act naturally around him. Normally, he would have enjoyed her teasing, but this time he realized that he couldn't take it that lightly anymore. He thought silently that he was sorry, but things had changed for him. Noticing his silence, Suyeon looked a little uncertain and said softly that she had just been joking, but it seemed it hadn't been funny this time. At that moment, he suddenly stepped closer to her and kissed her. After that, both of them quietly moved toward the restroom, where they began their sparring training session together. That night, after closing the shop, both of them stepped outside together. Soyeon looked at him and said with a calm smile that he had done good work today as well. He responded with a small grin, saying he has also done well. But as she turned around, her expression shifted. She looked slightly annoyed and said that, in the end, they had closed up the shop without doing any business after she had returned. She added that he had been unusually full of energy that day. Feeling a bit guilty, he immediately apologized. However, Suyeon waved her hand lightly and told him to forget about it. She said there was no need for him to apologize, reminding him that it had been a decision both of them had made together. She remarked that some people might even think he had forced her into it against her will. But she still meant she had said earlier that they couldn't do that kind of thing inside the store. After all, they needed to focus on running their business properly. He listened quietly to her words, then hesitated for a moment before asking whether it would be right for her if they weren't in the store. Realizing how that might have sounded, he quickly corrected himself, explaining that his words were that he wanted to have dinner with her, perhaps go to a cafe together and talk. He told her that he had found a really nice restaurant and thought it would be great if they could go there together sometime. Trying not to sound pushy, he added that it was completely fine if she didn't want to, and that he would understand if she said no. Suyeon looked at him for a moment, and then, with a faint smile, said that if that was what he wanted, she didn't really have much choice but to listen to him. Hearing that, his face immediately brightened. He felt genuinely happy and thought to himself that they would go out, eat together, and have a good time. But then as he walked, a sudden realization struck him. He had basically just asked his boss out on a date. He couldn't believe he had done that so casually. He thought about how earlier they had even done cardio training together in the store, and now this. He wondered if he had completely lost his mind. He told himself that he shouldn't be acting like this, but lately, every time he saw his boss, it became harder and harder to hold back his feelings. He questioned himself silently if it was really okay for him to keep doing this. It seemed like the boss didn't really hate it, but he couldn't be sure anymore. He decided that thinking too much about it wouldn't solve anything. So, with a small sigh, he told himself to just head home and enjoy a quiet night with some pizza. As he walked toward his home, lost in his thoughts, he couldn't help smiling to himself, admitting that he was honestly looking forward to going on a date with his boss. But suddenly, as he reached his place, he stopped in surprise. Someone was standing right in front of his door, waiting. It was Solha standing in front of his door. As soon as she saw him, she said that he was finally there, and she remarked that he should have gotten out of work ages ago. He stopped in surprise, still trying to process the fact that she was actually waiting for him outside his place. Before he could say anything, she noticed the pizza box in his hand and raised an eyebrow, saying teasingly that he must be quite rich to be buying things like that. He chuckled awkwardly and replied that it was just his monthly treat to himself. Then, still confused, he asked her about her presence at that hour and whether her visit had something to do with the thing that had happened earlier in the store. At that, her expression softened a little, and she began to apologize. She admitted that he had gotten burned earlier because of her and said she felt genuinely sorry about it. She explained that she hadn't been able to apologize properly before because her mother had come back and things had gotten busy. He smiled slightly and told her it wasn't that bad, reassuring her that it was fine. He said he shared some of the blame, too, since he hadn't been paying enough attention in the kitchen. Then, looking at her curiously, he asked if she had really come all the way there just to say that. She nodded firmly and said yes, adding that she really hated being indebted to anyone over something like that, especially to someone like him. She said that he was the kind of weird guy who would make a big deal out of it later, and that it was the worst. Then she asked if he understood, saying that she had already said everything she needed to say, so she would be going now. As she turned to leave, she added with a hint of mockery that, judging by the dumb smile he had on his face while walking there with his pizza, it didn't seem that serious to him anyway, so he should just enjoy his food. He stood there for a moment, watching her walk away, thinking to himself if she had really come all that way just to apologize. Then, as he thought about her words earlier, he realized that she must have been waiting for at least 30 minutes while he was out getting the pizza. And even though she had already bought him bandages, ointment, and ice cream earlier, she was still there to make sure he was okay. To him, that felt far beyond what he deserved. It almost felt like he was the one indebted to her now. Impulsively, he called out her name. When she turned back, he told her that since she was already there, he wanted to share his pizza with her. He looked flustered and quickly explained that he didn't mean anything strange by it. He said that since she had already gone out of her way to bring him all those things earlier, he wanted to repay her somehow. He added that it looked like she had been waiting for a while, so he felt sorry for that and thought it would be nice if she joined him for a few slices before heading home, if she liked pizza. That is, as he said that, he couldn't help but think how odd the situation had become. The two of them, standing outside at night, awkwardly talking about pizza. It wasn't what he had imagined at all. Ciola stared at him for a few seconds before shaking her head and saying that he must have gone crazy, insisting there was no way she would want to eat pizza with him. But after a brief pause, her curiosity got the better of her, and she finally asked, almost reluctantly, about the kind of pizza he had bought this time. Ciola finally agreed, and both of them went to his place. Once they sat down, they opened the pizza box and began eating together. She took a bite and immediately started eating with genuine enjoyment. Watching her, he couldn't help but think that she was really digging in. It seemed like she must have been quite hungry. Still, neither of them said a single word since coming inside. The silence stretched between them, heavy and awkward, and he thought that the awkwardness was going to kill him if he didn't say something soon. Desperate to fill the quiet, he finally blurted out, almost without thinking, that his place was really messy. Solha glanced around while taking a sip of her drink and replied dryly that cleaning up now and then wouldn't kill him. Her blunt remark made him blush with embarrassment, and he scratched his head, not knowing how to respond. After a short pause, she looked at him seriously and asked if he was continuing to work at the store because of her mother. The sudden question caught him completely off guard. He hesitated and thought to himself that maybe this was her intention from the very beginning, to bring up this topic. Trying to stay composed, he told her that she really shouldn't bring up something like that so suddenly. Ignoring his discomfort, Solha continued, saying that, as he had probably noticed earlier, both she and her mother were terrible at their work. He gave a small laugh and said, so she was actually aware of that. She nodded and said that this was exactly the reason all the previous part-timers had quit within a month. Then she added that her mother might look cheerful and easygoing all the time, always smiling without a care. But in truth, she was actually very quick to draw boundaries with people. She said that the guys who had worked at the shop before, those who had joined with some secret motives, had all left quickly. Then she looked at him directly and said that he, however, hadn't quit. He had just kept working at the store, day after day. She admitted that it made her think he was ridiculously persistent when it came to work. After a small pause, she leaned slightly closer and asked teasingly if he liked her mother that much, adding that she knew her mother was a very pretty lady. He looked at her in surprise, thinking that she really had no idea about the situation. Then he thought to himself that he had already explained this before. He told her that if that were truly the case, he would have quit ages ago. Then, half jokingly, he asked if she had any idea how many customer calls he got every day about wrong deliveries. She immediately tried to make an excuse, saying that getting the wrong item was totally understandable sometimes. He looked at her, realizing that she must have done that too, and thought to himself that her excuse sounded suspiciously practiced. He sighed and said that, as he had told her before, his feelings for the boss and his work at the store were two entirely separate things. Solha raised an eyebrow and asked if he really thought that would convince her. He thought for a moment before quietly saying that the boss reminded him of his father. His words made Seola stop completely. Her expression changed to shock. He continued, explaining that his father had raised him alone since he was little. He said it must have been hard for his father, though he didn't know all the details. Then he asked if she understood his words. He went on, saying that raising a child alone was incredibly difficult, and seeing the boss working so hard, despite being so careless with her own health, made him want to help her instead of running away. He admitted that sometimes he had wanted to quit, but he couldn't bring himself to say it after watching her struggle every day. He smiled faintly and said that occasionally she would give him some side dishes for free after work, and that alone helped him a lot. He joked that there was no way he could give up getting such delicious side dishes without paying for them. Seolha went silent and continued eating her pizza quietly. He looked at her and thought that things had suddenly become serious, but since he had already started, he couldn't just brush it off now. After a pause, he added that not registering for school had been a mistake on his part. He said it would probably be better for everyone if someone more experienced like him kept working overseas rather than taking a student's place. Solha looked at him incredulously and said she couldn't believe it. She had never met an idiot who actually forgot to register for school before. Her tone made his face turn red with embarrassment. Still, he thought that at least it seemed like she was finally starting to see him as a real person, not just another worker at the shop. He reflected quietly that, in truth, he wasn't all that different from the kind of guys Sola had mentioned earlier. Even though he hadn't meant it that way, from her perspective, it might look like he was pretending or hiding something. That thought didn't sit well with him. It made him feel uncomfortable, as though he were deceiving her somehow. He told himself that he really should stop acting like that. When he finally looked down at the pizza box again, he realized it was empty. He blinked in disbelief, thinking to himself that he had only managed to get one slice. As Solha noticed the empty pizza box, she seemed slightly embarrassed and told him to just finish her piece. She warned him not to go back on his word later. He was quietly thinking that this must be the same feeling parents talk about when they say they feel full just by watching their children eat. But before he could say anything, he suddenly felt something strange crawling on his body. A shiver ran through him. He shouted in panic that there was a bug. The sudden creepy feeling made him yell even louder, saying it felt as if a dinosaur had appeared out of nowhere. He desperately asked Seolha to kill it. She looked at him with disbelief and asked if he was actually being serious. He pleaded with her, saying that this once she should help him. He even promised to buy her another pizza, begging her as if she would be saving his life. She sighed to herself, realizing how ridiculous the situation had turned out, but then she asked him to hand her a tissue. As soon as he gave it to her, she used the tissue to make the bug run away, getting rid of it. He let out a deep breath and told her that she had just saved his life, calling her his savior. She immediately told him not to make such a big fuss over something so small. She laughed in disbelief and commented that she couldn't believe a grown man was terrified of a bug no bigger than a thumbnail, pointing out that even her mother wouldn't be scared of something like that. He tried to defend himself, saying it had nothing to do with the size of the bug, but everything to do with the way they made that creepy crawling sound that sent chills through his entire body. He explained that when it fell on his shoulder earlier, his heart almost stopped, insisting that bugs were designed to be as repulsive to humans as possible. She laughed even harder, finding his reaction completely ridiculous, and then told him that this was exactly the reason he should clean up his place from time to time. If he didn't, bugs would just keep coming to stay there. After saying that, she said she was going to leave. He agreed and told her okay. She thanked him for the pizza and he replied with a casual goodbye. After she left, he found himself thinking that this was the first time he had ever seen her laugh so freely. The next morning, he went to the shop and started working alongside Suyeon. After some time, Sola arrived at the store as well. She walked up to her mother and told her that she had forgotten her phone at home again. Suyeon responded with a small smile, saying that maybe she did it on purpose, just so she could see her daughter more often. Solha teased her, pointing out that she came by often, even when her mother didn't forget her phone. She mentioned that she had picked up some coffee on the way to the shop and handed one of the cups to her mother. Suyeon thanked her warmly, and then Solha turned her attention toward him, asking the reason he wasn't going to say hello to her today. He was just about to greet her when she abruptly changed the topic, saying that whatever, he should just keep working, and then she turned around and left the shop. Suyeon looked at the two coffee cups in her hands and commented that one of them must be his. She looked at him curiously, surprised, and asked if he and Solha had already become friends after working together for just a single day. He quickly denied it, insisting that it wasn't like that. She told him she wasn't so easily fooled, but he explained that although they weren't exactly close friends, they were definitely closer than before. He thought to himself that after working together, he had seen how hard Solha tried and realized that even if she had been sharp with him before, she was actually a decent person at heart. Soo-yeon smiled warmly and said she was glad the two of them had become friends. After finishing his work, he returned home and sat down in front of his computer, browsing online for good restaurants. As he scrolled through the listings, he came across one that looked particularly impressive, and he thought that he hadn't even known such a restaurant existed. It looked like a pleasant place, and he wondered if his boss would like it. He sighed to himself, realizing that planning a date was proving to be a much more difficult task than he had expected. Just then, he heard someone knocking at the door. The sudden noise startled him, especially since he had been completely focused on his screen, and he quickly got up, calling out that he would be right there, and hurried toward the door. When he opened it, he was taken aback to see Sola standing outside. She looked at him and simply said that she had left her hat there yesterday. He nodded, letting her in, and went to retrieve the cap from the shelf. As he handed it to her, he explained that he had actually been planning to give it to the boss earlier that day, but had completely forgotten. While doing so, he thought to himself that there hadn't really been any need for Seolha to come all the way to his place for such a small matter. She could have just told her mother, and the boss would have passed the message on to him. However, when he turned back around, he was startled to see that she had already stepped further inside and was standing in front of his computer. He froze for a moment, surprised by the sight of her looking at his screen. Trying to make sense of her actions, he asked if she liked cats. She casually replied that she didn't particularly like them, and she had only clicked on a cat video because she saw it on his subscription feed. Then, with a teasing tone, she added that it didn't really suit him. He felt slightly confused and awkward, apologizing instinctively while thinking to himself that he had no idea how she had managed to look through his subscriptions. Before he could say anything else, she extended her hand toward him. He found himself thinking in confusion that maybe she was treating him like a cat, though he couldn't quite understand the reason. Acting almost without thinking, he placed his hand over hers. The moment he did that, she suddenly shouted at him to just give her hat back. Realizing the situation instantly, he quickly apologized in embarrassment. After retrieving her hat from him, she turned around and left his place. As she walked away, she kept thinking to herself that the visit hadn't gone quite as she had planned. She hadn't really learned anything new about him, even though she had purposely left her hat there as an excuse to come by. She had expected to find something odd, maybe that he was subscribed to some strange channels online, but it turned out he wasn't. In fact, he was even subscribed to a cat channel, which she found surprisingly ordinary, and in her view, a bit strange for a grown man. She thought perhaps she had been too suspicious of him all along. After actually talking to him, he didn't seem like a bad person. Still, she told herself that people could change at any moment if given the chance, so she decided she should continue keeping an eye on him. While walking, she opened her phone and started searching for the same channel she had seen on his computer earlier, wanting to check it out herself. A while later, when she reached home, her mother was already there. Her mother commented that it was quite late and asked where she had been. Seolha casually replied that she had just stopped by a friend's place. Then she asked her mother if she was planning to take a shower now. Soo-yeon said yes, she was about to. Just then a phone started ringing. Seolha noticed it was her mother's phone, and she playfully played the ringtone, asking if that was really her mother's ringtone and whether she liked it. Soo-yeon smiled and said that she did, thanking her daughter. Solha then teasingly asked if her mother was expecting someone to call her at that hour. Soo-yeon looked a bit puzzled and said she had no idea, telling Solha to just answer the phone. When Solha checked the screen, she noticed it was Hunwoo calling. She frowned slightly, saying she didn't know the reason he would be calling her mother so late at night. When she answered, Hunwoo's voice came through the line, asking if this wasn't the boss. Seolha replied that it was her speaking instead and asked about the reason for his call. He explained that he just needed to ask something work-related. Seolha told him to go ahead and say whatever it was. She would relay the message to her mother. Then, after a brief pause, she added that it would be better if he saved her number instead. She told him to store it in his contacts so that the next time he needed to reach her mother, he could just call her directly. She began to recite her phone number, but Hunwoo, on the other end of the call, said that he would need to grab a piece of paper to write it down. Hearing that, she couldn't help but call him stupid, telling him that he could just save it in his phone right away. She instructed him to text her once he had saved it, saying she would check to make sure he had done it. Then, as if remembering something, She told him to also send her the link to the cat channel she had seen on his computer earlier. He asked in confusion if she really thought it was cute and whether she actually liked that sort of thing. She immediately denied it, saying that she only wanted to check if that channel was really as wholesome as it appeared. To her, someone like him being subscribed to such a channel was just too suspicious.